You know when the most powerful man in college football is begging Congress for help? That's probably a problem.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. Subscribe there. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hi, I'm Stephen Willis, and this is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast. Anyway, Greg Sankey spoke today at SEC Media Days. You were going to see some SOTs. We were going to have some sound on tape of him. They were slow to get it up. I got tired of waiting, so we're going to do our test with Brian Kelly, because a lot of what we were doing today was to get ready for Lane Kiffin's day. We're going to do a test with a Brian Kelly SOT just to make sure that it would work, it would look good, and things like that. But he did have an interesting answer about whether or not LSU was going to have a two-quarterback system this year, which they're not. But he did answer that in a very politically correct way to keep his roster happy. So Greg Sankey's talking about NIL today. And he's mentioning all the state laws and all the stuff we've talked about for months. And then at the end of the day, he's like, we need something from Congress. And he spent a good 20 minutes talking about how he needed something from Congress. And he even mentioned while he was speaking about that nothing's going to come from Congress. The fact that you're counting on Congress is not a good look. It is not a good situation for college athletics if you are counting on Congress to do a single dang thing. They do not care about the benefits of student athletes. They do not care about the benefits of college sports. They do not care about all kinds of things that normal fans care about. So, whenever you are putting it on them to do the right thing and to help us out, it's not going to work. You need to come up with an avenue that you can handle this on your own. We had Walker Jones on the show. And Walker Jones, I think, has since gone on just about every show. And he talked about his carrot approach of something that he thinks he would be able to do. And maybe this collective association would be able to push it through as well, to where there's a carrot involved to kind of grease people to be governed by that anyway. Instead of like 3 or 4 or 5 schools that are benefiting from this free-for-all, we could have something more equitable to all schools that we like. And as Americans, we prefer our lives to be capitalistic. This isn't a political statement. This is a fact. Just period. Capitalism, capitalism, capitalism. That is the basis for our life. But we prefer our sports to be socialistic. Draft where the lower team gets the higher draft picks, salary caps, parity to where everything goes back and forth. Right now, college football is drifting towards mass capitalistic. Think English Premier League type situation without financial fair play, where Manchester City can just do whatever they want to do. And then you have a couple of schools that are just lucky to be in the league. That is where this is going. Unless we put in some guardrails to make it a little bit more equitable to more teams and increase parity, which we do with our sports anyway. But that was interesting to me. He also took a second to basically get on to everybody about gambling rules, and that gambling is become a prevalent thing state to state, and how this is making it more difficult for them. Now, I've talked about this gambling problem, and we're going to do lines, we're going to promote it and all that, because at the end of the day, in my opinion on it, you know what you can and you can't do. If you call it doing something that you can't do, that's not gambling's problem. That's not any of the organizations that you can go place a bet's problem. If you break the clearly defined rules, that's not those organizations. And I have a problem with saying, hey, somebody could could do something wrong, so we need to take this away from everybody. And that's always going to ring hollow for me. But those are the two like Debbie Downer points that Greg Sankey made. He did mention that SEC Media Days will be in Dallas in 2024 at the Omni Hotel. That is pretty cool and actually a very baller move, because last week the Big 12, they took shots at Texas and Oklahoma like you knew they would leaving the conference, because, it's, be gone, we're better off without you type situation. So the SEC is going to set up in their backyard, and the SEC is going to take over that state and take over Dallas in a way that it never has. That has been a Big 12 city for years. And next year it's going to be an SEC city. And Texas is becoming an SEC state, because Ole Miss being in the same conference with Texas and Texas A&M, and those are the two biggest brands in that conference. That's not even particularly close. Those are the two biggest brands in that conference. Texas is becoming an SEC state. Oklahoma is going to become an SEC state, because the biggest brand in Oklahoma is coming to the SEC as well. Make no mistake. Make no mistake about that. Anyway, I do want to take this before we play our video and move on, because we're running a test basically for the Lane Kiffin Day, so bear with me if something goes wrong. But I do want to say hi to our everydayers, and we love our everydayers that watch the show every day. And he says, "Hey man, just wanted to say I'm an Ole Miss alum currently stationed in Iwakuni, Japan, and recently I found your podcast and now I'm a daily listener. Tough getting up to date on Ole Miss football when I already have to wake up in the middle of the night for games. Thank you for what you do every day, and awesome to hear you served as well." Now, I do want to say this. Thank you so much, Andrew, and we are so glad that you are a listener to the podcast. If you are a service member and you are overseas and you have a question about anything, DM me. Ask the question. I will do my best to answer it or to find out the answer for you. Because as somebody that served, I missed basically the whole Eli Manning career at Ole Miss because I was overseas for most of it. I got to see him play one time. And I think it's important that you have that connection to home and the things you enjoy. But service is important as well. So this would allow you to do both things. So if you have a question, if there's anything you want to know, please, if you're a service member, do not hesitate to hit me up. Like I said, if I do not know the answer, I will find the answer. And I will get that to you as well, because, hey, I know the struggle with like AFN and all that stuff, as I used to do AFN myself. But that is really good. Thank you so much, Andrew, for that. Now, one thing is interesting. Brian Kelly took the stage today, and we were going to do a couple of shots with Greg Sankey, but they were slow to upload that as well. So we had to do it with Brian Kelly. So we're going to do a test with that as well. But they asked him, is this going to be a 2-quarterback system? Because during the offseason, they always were talking about how they were running Doug Nussmeier in the spring with the ones and all of this to prevent him from transferring. That's the dirty secret there. But the question got asked because they kept pumping it up so much that it felt like there was a 2-quarterback system, or there was 2 quarterbacks that LSU could count on as a starter, almost co-number ones is the way they framed it. But that wasn't necessarily the case.
It depends on what you mean by 2-quarterback system. We're not going to rotate them in and out of the game. Everybody has a different opinion as to what that means. We think they're both capable of being starters. Jayden is our starter, and Garrett will be ready, and we'll continue to prepare him. He got first-team reps in the spring. He'll continue to get those first-team reps. We believe we can win a championship with both of them, but what you won't see is one series, this quarterback, and another series, another quarterback. You saw that in the bowl game, which was a different environment than it would be in, say, an in-season situation.
There you go. That's Brian Kelly from SEC Media Days talking about his quarterback situation. And that actually was unbelievably smooth. So I feel sorry for people after Ole Miss goes on Thursday. We're going to have some fun with that. But that we're going to play SOTs, and we're going to do that pretty consistently. Though today I want to tell you that today's show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times back your first bet amount in bonus bets. That's up to $200. That's right, $20 and you land $200 back in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting on everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to hit the first home run. All on an app that is safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. Now, I do realize that Mississippi is a brick-and-mortar casino state where if you want to gamble on sports, you do have to go to a casino to do that. But if you're in Louisiana or Tennessee, New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Delta, Louisiana, Memphis, Tennessee, Jackson, Tennessee, Gatlinburg, Tennessee, those areas right there, you can use the FanDuel Sportsbook. And there's no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 back in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, an official partner of Major League Baseball. Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. Please subscribe there. Also, we're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day as we are working to set up Charles Stackhouse. Great interview. We're pretty fired up about that. Ole Miss great. We're trying to get on the show as well. So be on the lookout for that in the near future. Also, this week we should have our first NIL segment on the show with Jason Simmons of Dead Soxy, to where he can talk about all the things going on in NIL as we speak. So that should be a pretty interesting thing from somebody that is involved in the NIL space. So that's going to be worth tuning into as well. Anyway, Ole Miss got a couple of commitments this weekend, or yesterday, I should say. The first one they got is Luke Hill from Arizona State, a shortstop. People were talking about that. This was a best case scenario type player that Ole Miss could get. This absolutely a best case scenario. After what the draft happened with Jacob Gonzalez and then you lose Cooper Pratt and all of that, Ole Miss desperately needed a shortstop. And with Luke Hill, you will have somebody that honestly can be the best version of what you're hoping for at the shortstop position. Whenever you were looking at players in the transfer portal that you could get, he was a player that you would be hoping to. He's probably the best shortstop available in the transfer portal. Now, if you go back and you look at the stats, I did this out of order. I do apologize for that. 314, 6 home runs. OPS is really good. Good player. Defensive shortstop. He's from Louisiana. Everybody was nervous about LSU. LSU had a little bit of a logjam at infield. Ole Miss had a need and the ability to get something done, and they were able to get it done. If you looked at the Ole Miss Spirit, that's Zach Berry, Luke Hill transferring to Ole Miss. That's a really, really cool situation indeed. I'm pretty fired up about that. Now, he wasn't the only player that committed to Ole Miss. Let's see, what's his name? Jackson Ross out of Florida Atlantic. He is a guy that played third base at Florida Atlantic, hit 350, had like 14 home runs. On the infield today, Ole Miss got better. So everybody that has been gnashing your teeth about Ole Miss baseball, on the infield today, they got better. And I'm not even going to say they're done yet or anything like that, but it should be really cool as well. And looking through Twitter right now, I'm pretty fired up because they've agreed to terms the Tigers have with Max Clark, which is pretty cool for me because the Florida Complex League and the Rookie League home is 15 minutes from my front door. So I'm pretty fired up about that. So looking at these two players, looking at what Ole Miss needed. Now, Ole Miss probably needs some more arms. You're looking at a situation where a catcher could be a little bit interesting proposition. That could be a little bit of thing. But I was in a situation looking at this Ole Miss baseball team, and it's like at shortstop and at catcher, I am never necessarily going to doubt Mike Bianco. He's going to be able to figure it out because he always has. And especially at shortstop, I like what they're doing here. I think there's 2 years of eligibility, so you do get a chance to build it just a little bit. And also, you can see with Fisher at third base, the Duke transfer, he's got 2 years as well. You've got almost a replacement. Maybe the FAU kid is a replacement for Peyton Chatagnier. You got Will Furness over at first base. Maybe at the infield, you're in pretty good shape. And that's not even counting with what might happen with Ethan Leger or any of those guys. So we'll keep an eye on what's going on with Ole Miss baseball. And Derek Vandy Griff, I think he's about to start his podcast on our other channel to where he's going to be talking about all of this stuff. So tune into that as well. But Ole Miss baseball made moves. They got a little bit better today. Seriously. All right, when we come back, we will talk about the Egg Bowl and how that game, even though it's the most tricky game on the schedule, may not be as tricky as you think. Anyway, stick around. Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. For your second listen, check out Locked On SEC. Chris Gordy does a fantastic job promoting the SEC from his Locked On platform. He's at Media Days this week, along with a lot of the Locked On hosts, talking all kinds of SEC Media Days related topics. So tune in to Locked On SEC with Chris Gordy and find out what's going on. Every day is this week, by the way. Like we said before, Jason Simmons, our first NIL segment, we're going to do that as well. And we're also going to try and get Charles Stackhouse as well. We're having an unbelievably big run over the last 45 days. We have spent almost daily a member of the U.S. iTunes charts. Absolutely amazing for a fan base this small. To my knowledge, we're the only podcast that covers Ole Miss that has ever been on there. But we do that. We make it the best we can. And I just want to thank you for helping this grow. Thank you so much. And as we do this, we're trying to find local sponsors. We've sent out emails to companies. If you did not get an email, but you want one, hit me up in DM, and I will get that for you as well on Twitter. You can see it at the Stephen Willis. Shoot me a DM. They're open. But Egg Bowl week, the last week of the season. Hi, I'm Stephen Willis, and this is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast. And the Egg Bowl is set up to be the game that Ole Miss fans least want to lose. It's not the game they most want to win. That's LSU. This is the game they least want to lose. And on the other side, everything is based around Ole Miss. It just is. And I don't respect them. I don't necessarily care about what they're doing. I don't necessarily care about anything on the other side of this rivalry. It just doesn't affect me at all. What I care about is where Ole Miss is. Now, if you want to look at Mississippi State, this is a different situation because they are trying to replace just a coaching legend. Both of us in the family were huge Mike Leach fans. Becky actively quotes him. Swing your sword. I've read the book. I've just enjoyed following Mike Leach over the years. But I don't feel necessarily the same way about Mississippi State. And whenever you look at teams that run that air raid stuff, it's kind of like jet fuel, and it generally takes them a year or two to system change. Now, it'll be a little bit quicker with the transfer portal. Now, if you look at the offensive side of the ball and the keys of the season, more downfield passing. Now, we haven't proved that that can happen yet, and we haven't seen that that's even going to be a possibility. But theoretically, if you look at this, they want more downfield passing. receivers were transferring out of Mississippi State because they weren't downfield passing. Was that because of just what Mike Leach did, or is it something else, something more fatal that we might not know about? Now, if you look at the offense side of the ball, he does have the receivers who can make this work. The leading yardage guy, Ra Thomas, went to Georgia. Rufus Harvey, I think, is in the transfer portal. And Tulu Griffin are decent mid-range targets. But, I mean, there's no superstars on that side of the ball. Tight ends, they had to go find because there was none on the roster. Of course, one massive plus of this team is that most everyone is back on the offensive line, so they can kind of all learn how to run block together. And the backs are in place too with Dylan Johnson, who went to Washington, but Jaquavius Marks and Simeon Price and Penn State transfer Kevon Lee, they're about to see a whole lot of work. Now, the offensive coordinator has come in from Appalachian State. He ran that system, so expecting a lot of the stretch plays and a lot of the offense that Chase Bryce ran with that Mountaineer offense last year, you would see a similar version of that. It'll look a little bit different than you're used to with Mississippi State seeing that side of the ball, but they're going to attempt to do that. Now, I do think offensively, by the time Ole Miss plays Mississippi State, the quarterback in that game will be Mike Wright, in my opinion. You can clip this, do whatever you want to do. I do think by the Egg Bowl, Mike Wright will be the quarterback of the Mississippi State Bulldogs. And that isn't necessarily a thing towards Will Rogers. It's just whenever a quarterback that is in that system and so ingrained with what they're doing, they don't really go from system to system. Those type quarterbacks did not get recruited to do that. You either can do it or you have trouble with it. And I think Mike Wright's legs are going to be enough of a weapon to where you can make your offense more sustainable, for lack of a better word. So that's something you should keep an eye on as well. Now, Zach Arnett is a defensive coach, and they have a decent defense. And keeping with the youth movement happening across Mississippi State, 34-year-old Mac Brock moves up to the defensive coordinator. I'm doing air quotes right now because that's a Zach Arnett joint. They only allowed 445 yards and 23 points a game. Their defense is pretty good and was pretty good. But it starts with a line that does have to replace a few good parts. And it does have a good starting three in Nathan Pickering and Jayden Crumity, and the defensive line is solid. Because Mississippi, they do defensive linemen. You can, if you want to look at a place where defensive linemen is created and created very well, it is Mississippi. So their biggest transfer loss was Ra Thomas that went off to Georgia. Their biggest transfer in was Kevon Lee from Penn State. The Mississippi State receiving corps will be more than fine with a slew of new parts to go along with established veterans. The only real problem at Penn State was he wasn't Nicholas Singleton or Katron Allen, two freshmen that came and basically took his job. That's the reason he left. Before those two, Lee led the Nittany Lions in rushing both in 2020 and 2021. So they took his job after he was an incumbent two-year starter. Mississippi State is already strong at running back, but again, with the Appalachian State style under Barbie, there will be more of a steady rotation of runners. If you look at the key players, this is embarrassing. Mississippi State should probably be embarrassed by this. Their key player is Nick Barmier. He's a place kicker. And I don't know if that says as much about their place kicking situation last year or the fact that they don't have any elite super standout athletes this season. But Barmier is a good field goal kicker. He's hit 35 of 49 all time, 143 of 147 extra points in his time at UCLA. It's his kicking game now. So we'll see exactly how that goes as well. Their key game is against the Kentucky Wildcats on November 4th. If you look at their schedule, it has a chance to get sideways pretty quick. I think them and Auburn are going to be competing for the bottom of the division. And it's just all going to be because of the system change. It just happens. Last season, there's no beef with not getting by Alabama, Georgia, or LSU, but the Bulldogs lost to Kentucky That's something that potentially could happen again as well. But there's no world that Mississippi State becomes the team that they want to be without beating Kentucky. Now, they most want to beat Ole Miss, but they need that Kentucky game above all else. Now, if you look at their schedule, this is how Mississippi State ends the season, November 4th versus Kentucky, as we mentioned before. Then they play in College Station against Texas A&M. Then they get Southern Mississippi at home. Like I said, whoever scheduled this should be fired on the spot. And then they get Ole Miss in Starkville on Thanksgiving night 5 days later. Southern Mississippi is going to be so jacked up for that game that there's a chance that Mississippi State gets beat, honestly. They end up losing that game looking ahead to the Ole Miss game. If you look at the ESPN FBI matchup predictor, Ole Miss is a 60.8% probability favorite to win the game to 39.2%. If you want to know what that means, if they played 100 times, Ole Miss would win 60.8% of them to losing 39.2% of them. Just kind of is what it is. Now, one thing that is very interesting going on, our season predictions are over. Our W's and L's, we made it through. My season prediction for Ole Miss this season is 9-3. And that's with a game that they should win at Auburn, losing that game, and a game that they are favored to lose, winning that game. So I'm trying to figure out how the season goes and everything. But 9-3 is my prediction. If you look over at the FPIs on there, you can see that it's not necessarily there's not a coin flip game on the schedule. But the 60% games, the 66% games, those 4 games are the ones that are the closest, I guess, to the middle. But you have to basically really stretch to make those a toss-up. But I'm pretty fired up about that. Now, the way this goes and everything, Ole Miss should be a 7 to a 10-point favorite over Mississippi State as of right now. Just should. If you look at the probability and everything's going on, Ole Miss has a better football team than Mississippi State. But this is one thing to remember. Ole Miss had a better football team than Mississippi State last year. And weirdness happens because there's always a situation where weirdness happens in the Southeastern Conference. It's going to happen. That's the reason you pick a game that you don't expect to win and you pick a game that you totally expect to win and you flip those and you just guess which one it's going to be because most every team has games like that. So today, thank you very much. We did kind of a rundown of Greg Sankey's complaints and how basically not necessarily NIL is ruining football, but the lack of regulation of NIL is kind of ruining football. We talked a little bit about the 2 commitments to Ole Miss Baseball. Pretty fired up about that. And we previewed the Egg Bowl as well. I do hope everybody tunes in for that. Anyway, thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. For your second listen, check out Locked On SEC. Everydayers tune in this week where Jason Simmons should be by to talk NIL as well. We're trying to set up Charles Stackhouse as well. And Patrick Broomfield has reached out wanting to do an interview as well. So we're going to try and set up all 3 of those interviews. So until tomorrow, take care. Hotty toddy.